For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Diego Meller. He's the co-founder and CEO of Jampp. And today on the show is a follow-up to our episode with Kevin Frisch, who was formerly the head of performance marketing at Uber, talking about the ad fraud case. And particularly, I was interested in talking to Diego because he is on the ad buying side, and in particular has many clarifications to make, frankly, about what we talked about with Uber, and just clarify the differences between ad networks, which is where the predominant fraud was within the Uber case, versus programmatic, which is where Diego has focused his business. And we talk about the pivot, frankly, that his business went under and the stress that they were under to move in that direction and to eliminate fraud that they were seeing in terms of their services and solutions that they were providing to marketers. We also talk quite a bit about marketers' reactions and, frankly, the surprising reactions that they're still asking for this fraudulent inventory. And I hope if you're listening to this today that you take this as a warning shot and to think about how you can improve your own efforts in your businesses, because I'm a little worried for us as marketers that a reckoning is coming. And many of us listening to this program, and hopefully those that are listening won't have this impact them because they'll learn from this conversation today. But those that aren't listening today, there'll be jobs lost over this issue going forward. And anyway, I wanted to bring it to light. I hope that you'll listen with intently into what Diego is talking about and the pivot that his business has gone through. And you know, as foreshadowing the pivot, I think that marketers should be thinking about, especially in regards to their digital marketing efforts today. So without further ado, here's Diego. Diego, welcome to the show.
Very happy to be here.
I think this may be the oddest way I've ever met a guest, in the fact that we came to know each other via a tweet on the recent episode with Kevin Frisch on the Uber ad fraud case. And so I think this is the first time a tweet has ever introduced me to a future guest. So I don't know what to make of it.
Well, I'm happy to be the first time of anything. So yeah, I mean, just to recap what happened there, there was a lot of, let's say, viral reactions to your great podcast, Kevin Frisch, but some of those were a bit, I would say, misrepresented. And basically, there was one in particular that talked about how terrible display traffic is in general. And that kind of caught my attention because not all display traffic is equal. And basically, display traffic is what we do at Jampp. So if someone is talking about your product as being terrible, you can't help coming out and defending it. So yeah, that's how we connected.
Well, and you were absolutely right. I think in particular, there was some mention that the Uber case was based around programmatic, and it wasn't. It was display ad networks, to be clear. And you were absolutely right about clarifying that point. So help me set the record straight on programmatic versus display ad networks and sources of fraud.
Yeah, sure. So what happened, or what what was being talked in those tweets and in your interview, it talked about both ad network and programmatic display traffic in the same way, and there's a very big difference between those two. I mean, I can understand how people not in the space or in the industry can confuse both, because at the end of the day, they are both connecting advertisers, in that case Uber, to an aggregated supply of publishers. That's in broad terms what they do. Now, the key difference between those two worlds is how they connect those advertisers and the publishers. So on the ad network model, which I would equal to the affiliate model, actually, now I'm going to have 100 people on Twitter defending the affiliate model. But on mobile in particular, the ad network model is very similar to the affiliate model, and it's basically a very manual and untransparent way of running traffic on a particular campaign. Now, the programmatic way, which I would prefer, I mean, it's also called, or you can also call it, or the companies that run programmatic traffic, you normally call them DSPs, and the acronym stands for Demand Side Platform. Basically, the way they connect the advertiser and the publisher is through a real-time bidding, which is an automated way of bidding on a particular ad impression and showing that ad. And basically, in real-time bidding, the chain from the ad being displayed all the way to, let's say, a click and a purchase or whatever happens inside an app, that's all basically recorded and it's transparent when the advertiser wants to see it. And in fact, in most DSPs, you can see that by default transparently. Now, in the ad network world, you don't have that trace basically. What you have is a tracking link that a publisher or an ad network can basically put anywhere and generate attributions and generate clicks, installs, purchases, and so on. And the way that works is that it leaves itself very open to fraud and manipulation. In fact, we've seen cases where tracking links, click tracking links, were being triggered by impressions. So every time an impression was happening, the MMP was reading that as a click. So you can imagine the difference in conversion there. And that's just one little example. There's many, many ways of rigging this game. Now, I'm not saying, and I never said that there is absolutely no fraud in the programmatic world. There is some, but it's different from what you see in ad networks, and it's a lot harder to do, and it's a lot harder to find. Again, because the default setting in a way for the SPs is full transparency throughout the whole conversion funnel, which is something you do not have in the ad network in the non-programmatic world, basically. Is that clear to you? Does that make sense?
It does make more sense hearing you describe it, and the fact that it's, the transaction is tied out, if you will, in the DSP or programmatic side versus just being unique tracking links, frankly, on the display network.
And one thing I might add is that maybe the other way we know this world very well is because we've been in both worlds. So when Jampp started, we were never an ad network ourselves, but we were an aggregator of ad networks. And basically, we discovered that most of the non transparent ad network traffic was actually fraudulent. And every time we had an issue when something didn't add up and we started looking at what was going on, we found fraud. And we started developing, actually at the time, most of the technology we were developing was to catch the fraud and to filter it out before it even happened. So before we would send that traffic to our advertisers, then we realized it was kind of a fool's errand because it was 60, 70, 80% of the traffic in some instances. And that's when we kind of realized, maybe it was time to pivot and get out of that business.
Well, so I mean, pivoting your business model because of the fraud you were seeing, tell me about that. That has to have been a somewhat painful transition, maybe very painful. I don't know.
Yes, it was definitely very painful. And it was something that took some time for us to realize that we had to do. But basically, as I said before, these instances of fraud kept getting more frequent. And every time we researched what was going on, we would find that fraud was not the exception, but the rule in most cases and in most ad networks that we were working with. So basically, we kind of looked into the future and said, hey, if we don't think this business is going to be around in the next 24 months. This was it was late 2016, early 2017 when we were looking at this and said, hey, let's get out of this. Let's start basically shifting all our media buying to our DSP. At the time, we already had developed a DSP, but it was still a very small fraction of the traffic we were acquiring. Why? Because think that when you were comparing both sources of traffic, obviously the fraudulent pretend traffic was always better because it was pretend. So when you're buying something that is magic and always works well and has a very high degree of conversions and the cost per installs are very low and the cost per acquisition is very low, how are you going to compete with the real world? So we made the decision, and in fact, we made a plan which meant that within 6 months, and that was now early 2017, that we were going to get completely out of non-programmatic, and that involved communicating our customers, and that was the task of our sales team and our accounts team mostly. And the communication was both, hey, I cannot sell you this thing anymore, but I'm going to sell you this other thing. But then that came with a high degree of trying to evangelize why the old stuff was bad and the new stuff was better, and that was very hard. Then from an accounts point of view, and the people in operations running the actual campaigns, they had to get completely retrained. Their previous job was to basically manage ad networks and manage performance that way. And the new way of doing things was basically setting up the campaigns on the bidding platform, which was a completely different thing to do. And then from a technology point of view, we had to get our DSP basically ready to scale. When we started this, it was 5% of the traffic, and now it's 100%. And then ready to make that in the smartest possible way. And that means being able to ingest a ton of data, which is something we require from our advertisers. They have to share with us everything that goes on inside the app. And then the platform has to use that to basically make the best purchase or bidding decisions when bidding on the exchanges, basically trying to guess or estimate what's the likelihood of a particular ad impression into producing a great user. So a user that will either click on an ad or install a particular app and then convert and buy something or order or book something within that app. And one thing I should say, Alan, so our experience is only on mobile and only on app. So everything I've been talking about is on the mobile app world, not on desktop, not on that. That's a world that we have nothing to do with, and I don't have any experience in.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so just for listeners' sake, I want to recap a little bit of what we've been talking about, but just to underline a few things. So, we met through the Uber ad fraud episode, but around that time when that ad fraud was coming to light for Uber, you're noticing fraud in your own aggregation of ad network buys. You're starting to filter out fraud and realize that it's 60 to potentially 80% or higher of the volume, if you will, I guess, that you're trying to buy. You're like, this is not sustainable. We have to get out of this business. You then say, okay, we're going to pivot our business from 95% of what we're doing to the 5% that we think might be good traffic. Retrain everybody inside the company and reorient everyone around 5% of your business to try to regrow the business at that point. I got it right?
You got it exactly right. One thing I didn't say, which is important, is that this couldn't have been done with the support of some of our advertisers that understood the difference. And actually, Uber was one of those. So around that time, and this is what was shared by Kevin in your interview. So during that time is when Uber basically decided to stop completely non-programmatic traffic. And we were one of the partners that at the time was so we were working with Uber at the time, but only with programmatic traffic. So they were one of our very early adopters, let's say, that said, we'll keep working with you, Jampp, as long as you don't do any non-programmatic. And that helped us. So a lot of the technology we developed at the time and the way we grew our DSP and grew our technology or improved our bidding algorithms had to do with Uber and others that were understanding that that was the way to go. And even up to today, there are articles talking about this. Uber is only doing programmatic, basically. They're not doing anything else in display. Then they're doing social and all this stuff.
Right, right. So, you've got a couple, I don't know exactly the right number, but you've got a handful of advertisers that are supporting you through this transition. What are the other advertisers saying, the other marketers coming to the table? You're basically saying, I can't sell you this cheap inventory anymore.
Yeah, that is super interesting because that's something that was probably the hardest thing, and it's probably a lot of that still happens today. And what would happen? So the typical meeting would go like this: we would sit down, would show all the evidence, we would show them how the traffic they had been buying so far, not only from us but from other suppliers, in particular ad networks. We showed them how things couldn't add up, and we showed them why programmatic was the way to go and the transparency they would get. And we showed that as a consequence of that, cost would have to go up. But it would have to go up because what they were spending on before was just not real. They were not buying anything. I mean, at the end of the day, they were just paying for either for organic traffic or for traffic that they had acquired in a legit way from other sources like Facebook or other legit sources. Now, the advertiser would go like, that's amazing, guys. Like, thank you so much for sharing that. So yes, let's go all programmatic, but I still want to pay a $1 cost per install and $3 CPA. And, our jaws would drop and we'd be like, but didn't you understand what we just told you? And the advertiser would go like, yeah, that's all great. And I love it. And, yes, that's definitely the way to go. But, I'm going to fictionalize this, but yeah, we just spent $100 million on crap, I cannot just turn around and tell to my board or to my CEO that I just threw this money away. So I cannot explain this. I cannot justify this change in cost. And that happened a lot. And let me tell you, it still happens. So let's say the extreme reaction was the Uber reaction, where they said, you know what, we're going to go out in public and expose this. And we're going to sue our agency or sue our suppliers that were selling us this crap. But most companies didn't do that. And in fact, there's almost no other case, at least that I'm aware of, where they did something similar. And the most frequent scenario that we saw in our customers was a strategy of basically phasing out gradually the crappy traffic and blending it with good traffic process that would eventually get them to 100% programmatic traffic. So that's the most cases, and it still happens today. In fact, a bit too much. And the thing that is widely misunderstood as well is that you cannot contain or basically isolate the fraudulent traffic from the non-fraudulent traffic. Why? Because the fraudulent traffic is fraudulent because it misappropriates attribution from the legitimate traffic. So basically, if you're spending money in the right places, you're impairing your success or you're being detrimental to your own efforts by buying foreign traffic, because it's reducing, it's stealing the attributions from the legit traffic. And that's why one of our conditions to work with advertisers is to make sure that they don't spend money on ad networks and on affiliate traffic, because we know that hurts our results.
That's helpful to understand. I mean, if I'm just trying to, get into your mindset during this period of transition. It sounds like it's still happening where marketers are saying, no, I love what you're doing. And yes, that's the right way to do it. But can you get me some lower CPM traffic? Did you, when this was going through this huge transition, did you worry about the business, like this business that you founded?
Heavily. I mean, this was a sort of, it was a pivotal moment, no pun intended, but it was a pivotal moment for the business because it could have killed us. We didn't know if this was going to work. And in fact, based on everything we knew at that point, it wasn't going to work because most of the advertisers were buying crap. Most of them were kind of happy with it, and we didn't know if it was going to work. But we had a great conviction that we had to do the right thing. We didn't want to sell something that we knew was fraudulent and bad. And we said, hey, we want to be on the good side of this. And hopefully the good guys win here. And we'll see. And again, we were lucky because I think we were lucky in a number of ways, but we had a number of advertisers that understood and supported us. And we caught a bit of a wave or tailwind that let us make that transition without suffering too much. What happened that year is that the company as a whole didn't grow. In fact, we didn't go down either, but we stayed stagnant, but our programmatic revenue grew massively. And then by the second year of this, by 2018, we had gone to 100% basically. And it was 100% programmatic. And then obviously, that brought other challenges, mostly to do with the infrastructure, and because suddenly, we had all this data and we had all this automated activity that had to go through our own technology and through our pipes, and that was a bit harder than we had anticipated, and things broke a number of times. But now things have normalized, and they're pretty good.
Well, and so now you've switched your business to programmatic and your own DSP. Are you still struggle with fraud even in the new system? It sounds like there's still fraud, but I'm just curious to what extent. Or
We don't struggle with fraud within our traffic, and we don't have a lot of fraud conversations with our customers. So let's say the issues we have with fraud are not to defend our thing like they were when we were not programmatic, but the conversations are about why are you spending on ad networks while you're spending on DSPs? It doesn't make any sense. So that's how we struggle with it. Is that a lot of the advertisers, and I'm talking about large brands that everybody knows, that still spend on very shady stuff. And for me, I find it very hard to explain because it's behavior that I just don't get it. Because remember that the number one feature of non-programmatic traffic is that you get no transparency whatsoever. So you don't know where that money is being spent. You don't know who are the publishers. You don't know anything. And it's a pretty basic thing to ask from your media partner to share with you where are those dollars being spent. And that's something you don't get if you're spending on ad networks. So that's still happening, and that's the conversation. So those are the conversations we're having more with our advertisers. The conversation has switched a little bit more to incrementality testing, so or lift testing, where you through different ways try to prove what's the actual impact that media buy had on conversions or on events, on purchases or bookings or whatever it is you're measuring. And we try to focus the conversation on that. So we actually spent a lot of time and resources in developing our own lift testing technology. In fact, we have something that does it automatically and for free with ghost bidding. So ghost bidding means that instead of actually running ads to do an A/B test, you study the behavior of an ad impression that you would have bought through an exchange and compare to the impression that you did buy in the end and see how that results in purchases or conversions. So that's we try to focus the conversation on that instead of fraud, because at the end of the day, if you can prove that the ad impressions that you showed generated purchases and you can prove that in a solid scientific way, then that should be good enough. And the advertisers that get it, that's what they ask for. Now, again, to go back to your question, we have very sophisticated conversations with advertisers that question our, and rightly so, question our traffic and have incrementality conversations. But then we find that they also spend on ad networks and they don't ask any of these from those guys. And I don't fully understand why that happens, but it still happens and it happens a lot.
Do you have any impacts from some of the apps that are out there that are, I'm not exactly sure the right term to call it, but that are, looking for people to, let's use Uber as an example, just because it's an easy example. But I go to the App Store or Google Play, whatever the Google equivalent is, I type in UBER, and as soon as I hit R and start to download the Uber app, it floods my phone or fires off all the attribution pixels. Do you struggle with that problem as well? I mean, it's not your inventory, but I would imagine you're probably still impacted by it to some degree.
Yes. So basically, that's less likely to happen on iTunes. You see more of that on Google Play. So on Android now. Yes, I mean it's part of the fraud I'm talking about, and it's basically attribution fraud. Like we've seen things where you don't even have to click on an ad. You're playing a casual game, and the game finishes, and it just starts firing different ads. And within basically 25 seconds, you get ads for 10, 15 apps. And the only point of that is to get the attribution stolen. So basically, if you are shown an ad, that counts as a view of that ad. And because attribution works, most advertisers will work on view through attribution. That means that between the period that an ad was shown to someone and a conversion, then that gets attributed to a particular supplier. That still happens, and it's one of the things that happens. Now, again, much more likely to happen in the non-programmatic world, because then when you trace that, it doesn't make any sense. When you look at the logs, it doesn't make any sense. And that's something, so again, on a DSP, you can request the logs that show you every single transaction or every single step, let's say, in the funnel, from the bid on the ad exchange all the way to the publisher, all the way to the actual ad that was shown. What kind of creative was it? Was it an interstitial, a video, a banner, then the click, and then what happened with that user after the click? So that's something that that a DSP can provide, not something an ad network can provide.
Okay. What do you feel like, in your opinion, having gone through this and changed your entire business, what are the biggest misconceptions of ad fraud today?
It's a good question. I mean, I feel like maybe the biggest misconception has to do more with the kind of traffic than the fraud. So I think, in fact, the source of our connection is a big misconception. Talking about display traffic the same way as programmatic and putting all in the same bag is a misconception, and it's actually scary to me that marketers don't know the difference. And based on what I saw when I listened to your podcast and the reactions afterwards and the comments on LinkedIn and on Twitter, many people with like titles like marketing manager or growth manager, they didn't know the difference, or they appeared to not know the difference. I don't know. I mean, maybe they did, but my point is, it seems to be still a very confusing matter, and not everybody has the same understanding of it, and that's already a big misconception, because it's, if you think that all display traffic is equal, then you think that they're all equally fraudulent, and I think I've explained quite a bit why that's not the case.
No, that makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, so if you were going to advise those marketers or chief marketing officers thinking about trying to combat ad fraud, where would you tell them to start, and what would be your advice?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing I would advise is to buy media that gives you transparency. So if you can obtain publisher level transparency, so you can at any given point track exactly where your ads were shown, and you can request, and it doesn't need, most advertisers or marketers are not checking this all the time, but just knowing that you can do it at any time and that data is available for you makes a big difference. So that would be my number one thing. The second thing is this. So the traditional ad network and affiliate model actually is a CPA model. So it's, buying on a cost per acquisition, and the misconception is like, well, there's no risk if I'm buying on CPA, then I'm only paying for conversions. Now the problem is that the trade-off that ad networks have traditionally made is, hey, I take the inventory risk buying media, so in exchange of that, A, don't get the transparency, and B, only pay when I generate a conversion. And I would argue that that is the main culprit of the fraud issue, because it has put a lot of incentives on fraudsters to fake conversions and to fake attribution. Now, if you're paying CPM, to publishers, let's say, which is the way publishers get paid, by the way, on programmatic, there may be an incentive to fake ad impressions, but that's not going to get you anywhere if you don't generate clicks and conversions. And maybe, by the way, maybe that's more of a problem for brand advertisers because they're looking for ad impressions, but for performance, that's harder to trick. So if you're a publisher that you know is going to be paid on a CPA basis, which again is the case of ad networks, then you're going to do everything in your power to fake the A here. So to fake an acquisition, to fake an install, to fake a. But if you're going to be measured on ad impressions, that's harder to do, and especially if you're tracked at every point, which is what you do with programmatic. Now, number 3, I would say incrementality testing or uplift testing. So ask your user acquisition and retargeting partners the ultimate question, which is, help me understand how every dollar that I spent with you has come back to me in conversions, in purchases, in bookings. So help me understand that and help me see what's the return on these advertising dollars. So I think if you are doing those 3 things, so one, having the possibility of transparency or having access to what happened with the dollars that you spent. 2, not buying on CPA. And this is super counterintuitive and super controversial. And people can tweet me all they want and complain about this, but not a good idea to buy on CPA because of the reasons I just mentioned. And 3, measuring lift or incrementality. So measuring the actual impact that your dollars had on bookings or revenue or sales or whatever it is that you're measuring inside the app. And if any supplier has an issue with any of those 3 things, then something smells funny, because you shouldn't be afraid to do any of these things if what you have in your offering is kosher. Basically, if you're happy to show what you're selling and what you're buying.
Fascinating. I applaud your efforts to and your integrity, frankly, of changing your business because of the fraud that you're seeing, and in light of your customers asking you to do something else. In a world where marketers love to talk about customer centricity, having to buck that trend with your own customer base to say, no, this isn't good for you. So I'm glad there are people out there like you. I'm afraid, frankly, for marketers that we've now seen, to your point, it may be the only one that we've seen lawsuit, but the largest lawsuit for ad fraud brought by Uber on its agency or ad network partners. I feel like the day is coming where marketers are going to be, at a minimum, fired for their fraudulent buys that they're doing with company resources, or worse, prosecuted because of their negligence.
So if you want, I can tell you my opinion on that. So I think that, so let's put it this way. And there was an article about this somewhat recently, I think on Ad Exchanger, but I'm not sure. Basically, I believe that there needs to be some sort of like, I mean, and this is theoretical, right? But we should almost have a sort of amnesty where everybody kind of goes like, hey guys, let's come clean. We've all been spending on this. We've all been, let's just, do a sort of a reset. From now on, we all agree, and this is what we're doing. Now, that's never going to happen, right? So it's very complicated. And my take on it has always been that it's complicated and it keeps happening because it's kind of like a victimless crime here. Because look at it this way. So the marketer is reaching his or her goals and showing great numbers to management. The ad network is making money. The MMP is making money because they make money on volume as well. The publisher is making money. Basically, everybody involved is doing okay. And the only one losing here is either the advertiser, the brand, or if it's a large VC funded company, the VC is the one throwing the money away. So it's a very hard to catch, it's everybody's doing okay with this mostly until the buck stops somewhere. And there's been a few companies, again, like Uber and others that have realized and they have stopped it. But in most places, hey, everybody's happy. Everybody's like, look, we're buying users for $1. I'm a genius. And that's hard to turn around and to stop.
Everyone wants to think that they're a genius. So
Because you're a CEO, and again, you're not, you're a CEO of a fast-growing app, raised hundreds of millions of dollars in VC money, and there's some report that you're showing in your board meetings that shows your CAC, your customer acquisition cost, and you've been showing that for years. You've been showing a wrong number, and maybe your whole business case, maybe your unit economics only makes sense at that cost. And you've been showing this to your investors and raising money. And what are you going to do now? You find the truth. You find like your CMO comes with resignation letter and goes like, hey man, I've been throwing our money away for 2 years. What are you going to do? It's a very hard thing to do. And again, I don't blame anybody. It's hard. It's hard. And let's say the consequences of our realization were low because we decided to do it and we all knew what we were doing and we're risking our company. But yeah, we came clean and do it. But I understand why it's so difficult for everybody else.
Well, it sounds like if you can get to the other side, you're in a better place today. And maybe that's what we should leave marketers with today is that it's hard. You bet your company, but you're in a much stronger, better, more integrity full place today because of going through that.
Definitely. I think that the market in the long term rewards doing the right thing, and that should work for marketers there that want to do the right thing and come clean. We joke when we talk about for how long we haven't used ad networks. We talk in terms of like we've been clean for 2 years. We've been sober for 2 years because hey, it's like a drug. It's cheap. It works. It gets it gives you a high basically. So yeah, that's what's been happening.
I know. I was recently at an event with a bunch of associations and a couple consulting people, and used the term that this is marketers crack. We gotta break our crack habits. So, but yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate you coming on and telling this story. I do want to switch gears a little bit. I do this with everyone that comes on, so you're no exception. And I'd love to just ask you a couple questions more about you. And my favorite question to ask is, is there an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
Look, my experience is that I've been an entrepreneur all my life since college. So I actually started my first business out of college with my current, still my co-founder. So we joke that we've been together, for more than we've been with our wives. We've been doing business together for more than 20 years. At the time, we started an online survey business that we ended up growing and eventually selling to a publicly listed company. And then after that is how we started Jampp. Actually, Jampp is the pivot of yet another business. So we started a gaming business that failed, and that's how we pivoted to Jampp. But in my case, so you know how you have those families of doctors that everybody in the family is a doctor, everybody in the family is a lawyer, and you have these kids that feel the pressure, to study law or study medicine. So, well, in my case, everybody in my family was an entrepreneur, from my great grandfather to my father, and I actually had that pressure. It's like I always thought that was the only way, that I couldn't do anything else. And I was very lucky that my first venture I was very young. I was 19 when I started my first business. It ended up doing very well, which is not the usual thing that happens. Most businesses actually fail. In our case, it worked. We survived the internet bubble. So we started the business in 99, raised a bit of money. Luckily, we didn't spend it all. Internet bubble burst, and we had to survive for a number of years. And then we started doing pretty well. We started growing, and well, the rest is what I just shared. But I guess that kind of defined me, and that's why I am who I am.
That makes sense. And I mean, obviously, listeners are hearing an accent
Yeah.
from you.
What do you
Did
mean?
you did you did you grow up in?
I was born in California. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, yeah. So you're Argentinian,
I'm
right?
Argentinian, so I was born and raised in Buenos Aires in Argentina, and then I actually lived, and that's why you hear weird, kind of somewhat British accent, because I lived for 17 years in London in the UK, and then moved to California about a year and a half ago. So yeah, I've lived most of my adult life outside of Argentina, but I have a very strong connection because my business, a large chunk of my business is based there. My co-founder Martin is based in Buenos Aires. I go there a lot. So yeah, Argentina is still a very big part of who I am.
Oh, that's awesome. What advice would you give that younger entrepreneur, that younger self of you, if you were starting all over again?
I would tell myself, just go be a banker or a consultant or something like that. you'll you will live better, have better hair, stress less. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that literally. So I would tell my younger self that you can be whatever you want to be, and that you don't. There's no pressure, no matter what you do, and you can be successful in many ways. And not just being an entrepreneur. In fact, being an entrepreneur is probably the least obvious way to be successful. Most entrepreneurs actually don't do very well. And then look, I think that the other thing that we've learned along the way, we've had many crises and many ups and downs with both our first business and this one. Basically, it's being an entrepreneur is being very stubborn when you need to be stubborn. When the world is telling you that you should give up, you should not give up. But then it's also being flexible enough to know when you have to give up and to know when you have to change. And it's a bit of an art, right? To stay right in the middle. It's like, hey, when should you push? When should you be stubborn? When should you change? When should you pivot? When should you be flexible? And I tell you that in our case, both in our first business and our second current company, Jampp, we've changed our minds many times, and we've changed our business model, and we've changed many things. And the concept of sunk cost in a startup is very dangerous, to think that you cannot change, or you can't. So you sometimes you need to change completely, and that's fine. That's kind of what we've learned.
Yeah, it's important. And I can't remember who said this or where I read it. I want to say, I'm blanking on his name, but there's a Canadian business school dean or business professor. But in essence, what's described is, successful entrepreneurs or have this innate capability to hold dueling thoughts and approaches in their head at the same time. And I almost think it comes from, like, most people think entrepreneurs are inherently risk seekers. And I think that's false. I think good entrepreneurs are risk mitigators. And one way they do that is to hold two different possibilities in their head at the same time and easily pivot between the two, depending on the information that they see.
I completely agree. Yeah, and we're like, we are like, one of our big mottos is, hope for the best but prepare for the worst. And we're always, we always have a plan B in our heads, and we always, make sure that we have the right move, the weather turns, or if something goes the wrong way, or if, and that's, if you don't have that survival instinct, it's pretty hard. And look, I'm also not going to deny that you need to be lucky. It's something that, luck is a major thing. A lot of the things that went our way, we've been pretty lucky. And also, it's funny because when they ask, I've talked about entrepreneurship before, and people ask me stuff, and they go like, well, what are the main things you recommend? And I say, well, first, be born in a wealthy environment, so you have a safety net. Make sure to be born in the right place, and then be very lucky, and then you can do the right thing, and you can, try to work well. But yeah, I mean, the not everybody has, a safety net, or can take the risks that maybe I took when I was very young. And so it's, yeah, it's tough.
Well, I got two more questions for you. I think one's quick. We'll see. It's a new question, but I'm stealing it from another podcaster, but I like it a lot. Is what's been the most impactful purchase you've made, say, in the last 6 to 12 months of $100 or less?
Wow, I live in the Bay Area. Nothing is worth less than $100. you
I'll give
can
you a little
you can
flexibility on the
you
price.
cannot buy a single thing for less than $100 here. Good one. Look, so I'm gonna cheat. So not with the price, but I'm gonna cheat with the timeline because this is something I bought or I started paying for maybe a few years ago, at least 3-4 years ago. I read a book, at least a book every 2 weeks, because I listen to books when I'm driving or when I'm at the gym, which unfortunately doesn't happen that often these days. But when I go on walks or on bike rides, or so I'm always listening to books. And people argue that that's not reading, and I agree, but it's better than nothing. So if you don't have time, so in my case, I have 2 kids, I am busy all the time. I don't really have time to read books. And when I try to read a book at home, I fall asleep after 5 minutes. Now, this is the best way for me to read in the absence of time. So it's amazing. And you can just, read while you drive, read while you do something else. And there's some great books out there. Most of the new, if you're into business books, they all come out almost at the same time on paper or electronically and Audible. So yeah, and obviously podcasts, fall in the same category. And I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but those are normally free. So yeah, which is not bad.
No, I agree. And I've actually had the CMO of Audible, John Harrobin, on the show. And I would agree. I mean, I was in the car for 4 hours today driving and was re-listening, frankly, to a book that I really like on Audible, Culture Code. So
That's cool. I'm gonna look for that. I read so when I'll tell you a story about. So when I first started using Audible, the Steve Jobs biography had just come out, like the big one, the official one, and it was a very thick book. I don't know if you remember seeing that book, but it was a big one, and the audiobook I think was something like 6 hours long, and I had to go pick up a dog so my dog, we picked him up from this farm somewhere in England, the north of England, and the drive was 3 hours there and 3 hours back. And that was my first experience with Audible. Actually, me and my wife heard the whole Steve Jobs book, and I said, "Wow, that's reading without reading."
yeah, that's impressive. That's awesome. Well, last question for you. What do you feel is the largest opportunity or threat to marketers today? And maybe it's ad fraud. We've been talking about it the
Yeah,
other day,
so I think
but
the
I think
threat is pretty clear. So I think I've mentioned this. So I think that I feel that this is getting better, and I feel that the world is going in the right direction from the point of view of transparency and incrementality and so on. I think that there's always opportunities in things that people are not paying attention yet. So I think that that's either new platforms, either new formats, new types of creatives. I think using the maximum data possible to educate and customize your ads is a massive opportunity that most advertisers are still not leveraging. So if you have data that you can leverage to customize your app based on what your customers are buying or what they're reading, and you can use that in a smart way to show an ad creative that will become more relevant and become more interesting to your potential customers, that's great. And that's something that, again, most companies are not doing. Like, we have to work very hard to convince our advertisers to do it, and the impact that that has on conversion is massive. It's a material difference when you are using your data. And by the way, in most cases, this is completely anonymous data. There's no, you don't have to share identifiers that can bring you a privacy issue. It's just using what you know sells more, what you know your users like. And again, the impact is massive. And I think that's probably the biggest opportunity. Why? Because suddenly your ads become something useful to your customer and not an annoying ad. If I see an ad, I'm going to fictionalize here, but it could be a true. If I see an Audible ad of a book that I've been thinking about reading, and Audible is showing me that ad based on my previous books that I've read, that's not an annoying ad for me. That's actually a service to me. And I'm like, I've been thinking about getting this book. boom, I click, I get it. And the same you can think about with food delivery, the thing you can think restaurant booking. In many categories, you have data that you can use and turn that annoying ad into something that is useful, that actually saves me a few clicks. That I'm like, yeah, I've been thinking about doing this. And then you do it. And we have and when I say we, it's not just Jampp, but many companies out there have the capability to use that data, leverage it while protecting your customers' privacy. There's no privacy downfall there. In fact, it will only make ads more welcoming, or let's say will make your customers see ads in a better way than if it's just an annoying ad that is not targeting you. I mean, obviously I'm in the industry and I'm looking at ads all the time, but very often I get served with stuff that it's clearly not for me, and stuff that could have been very easily avoided with just a bit of data. So yeah, that I would say is the largest opportunity.
Good, good. Well, Diego, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
An absolute pleasure, Alan. Happy to come anytime. And if you have any questions, let me know. And if people want to fight me on Twitter for anything I said, I'll welcome the controversy, and I'll discuss on Twitter whatever your questions are.
Awesome. Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.